Hello, in the first chapter of my course about Ragozion Defense. I will divide my course into two parts. The first part will be when white is avoiding Ragozion, he is trying some other openings, for instance Catalan defense, and the second part will be for concrete Ragozion defense. Today we are going to see some two illustrative games about before mentioned opening. Of course, both of them will be between absolutely top grandmasters, because this will be Levan Aronian in this game with white and Magnus Carlsen with black. In the next game, the colors will be reversed. The game was played in 2014, so let's move on. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5. Here, of course, after move g3, we will have the Catalan defense, but Aronian let Carlsen to move the bishop to b4, and of course this is the starting position of the Ragozion defense. I'm not going to talk too much about theory in this chapter, because of course we are going to have a look at it in the next chapters. I will try to focus on some main and general ideas in this opening. Bishop g5, one of the possible moves here, one of the most often seen also. h6, bishop f6, queen f6, and e3. This is a little bit not that sharp line as it could be, because if bishop h4 here, and of course g5 can be considered, or something like that. So definitely Aronian didn't want to go for any sharp line. He just exchanges the bishop for the knight, which has some good things about that, because of course the queen on f6 is a little bit misplaced. It would like to stand on some other square. But of course exchanging the bishop for the knight is also not something which is ideal for white. e3, castle, rook c1, c4. This is also possible right now. There are some setups possible in which the light square bishop can be developed via b6 and b7. And also some ideas like c5 also comes into consideration. And this is actually what was tried in this game. Castle cd4, knight e4. Quite a smart move. It is absolutely playable here, and it is quite good. Queen f5, and here we have the first important moment, because actually here knight g3 looks logical, because of course white wants to take back the pawn on d4. But bishop d3 here is a really interesting alternative. What is the point behind that move? Let's have a look. Especially d3 is some serious inaccuracy, and this shouldn't be tried here. After a3, black already has some serious problems. Of course, there are some different tries from black. Let's have a look. ef2, of course, then after knight f2, queen a5, a b4, queen b4, queen e2. This just loses the piece. Some alternative is move bishop e7, which also looks quite natural, but also here after knight d6, queen d5, knight c8. As we can see, this loses material too. So bishop d2 might be the best, but also here black are facing some problems. Rook c5, queen f4, g3, everything is definitely forced. Queen g4, rook c4, with a threat of playing knight f6, winning the queen. Queen h5, queen e2. Something really bad about this position is that it is not that easy to escape with that bishop from d2. Of course, ef2 is right now possible, but white simply takes back on f2, and all of the lines are open against the black's king, and still black will have to lose some time with that, with escaping with that bishop. So knight c6, fe3, bishop a5, and here it seems that the position is not that bad. But after g4, taking on g4 is of course ridiculously greedy, and it shouldn't be even considered, because all of the lines will be then opened. Queen d5, g5. White has tremendous initiative. Probably this they are already too strong to parry. So d3 shouldn't be tried, but knight c6 is some good option. There is actually no good discovered attack on the queen from the bishop on d3. So a3, bishop e7, knight c5. This is not that dangerous as it could seem. Queen d5, bishop e4, queen d6, e d4. This position should be considered as equal. So this was really interesting, and of course this was some kind of trap in which Magnus Carlsen could possibly fall in. But anyway, knight g3 is of course also a decent move. Queen a5, e d4, knight c6, queen e2, bishop d7, a3, bishop d6, knight e4. White got some additional tempo because right now he's attacking the bishop on d6, but bishop feels pretty good on f4, also attacking the rook on c1. Rook c3, rook a d8, rook d1, b5. Both players were playing natural moves until this moment, and it was definitely unnecessary to weaken the c5 square. For instance, bishop b8 was a good looking move. After bishop a2, knight e7, knight c5, bishop c6, knight e5. Black can just take on e5 to release the tension. Queen e5, knight g6, queen g3, queen b6. It seems that black is absolutely fine here. As I mentioned, b5 is pseudo-active, and it actually more weakens the position that gives anything good to black. Bishop d3, just heading towards the king. And b4, this is another step into wrong direction. Knight e7 was still a good option, and nothing terrible is happening still. Bishop b1, knight d5, rook c5. Here we see the drawback of playing move b7 to b5. Bishop b8, g3, to prevent any moves like knight f4. Queen b6, b4, a6. White has some advantage, but it's far from anything bigger. So b4, as I mentioned, this is some inaccuracy for sure from black. Rook c5, queen b6, g3. Bishop b8 and queen e3. This time it is white who played a really bad move. For sure, rook h5 was some perfect lift of the rook to the king side. As we can see right now, there are some dark clouds around the black's king, and position is becoming really unpleasant. f5 would be the best option. Knight c5. As you can see, the position of black a little bit looks loose. So knight d4 has to be played. Queen c5. Knight e6 takes, king h8. It may seem that nothing terrible is happening actually, because even that rook f5 is not possible due to the pin on the rook on d1. But rook h6, this is the stunning move which should decide the game. Gh6, queen h6, king g8. Rook c1. Now black has some big problems with diagonal g8 to a2. Queen e7, bishop c4, rook f7, the only move of course. Queen h5, and the pressure is really huge. After, for instance, rook d to f8, white can even grab another pawn on f5. The shelter of king is completely destroyed, and black will suffer a lot. So queen e3 is some inaccuracy. There was some room for active play like rook h5. f5. The only move not to become worse. Really well played by Magnus Carlsen. Rook b5, and again some very well played move f4. Again the right choice, other white knight would land on c5. Queen c1, queen c7 and rook c5, just pinning the knight and the queen. Right now the character of play will be really sharp because Aronian rightly sacrificed some pawns just to get this very strong on the strong pin on the c file. Queen d6. Just after equalizing, Carlsen makes another bad decision. Rook c8 looks really natural, and in fact it is really good. Queen e3. If bishop e4, this looks lethal, but actually after knight e5, the point, black gives up the queen but gets some decent play. Rook c7, queen e3, knight c4, queen b3, ba3, knight d6, with a complicated play in which black shouldn't be worse. So let's have a look at the move queen e3, queen d8, knight d7 takes, queen e4. Some very strong battery of the bishop and the queen, but here in this variation it is almost forced to go for an equal endgame. Let's have a look. King hides on d8, it feels pretty safe, and after queen h2, of course queen h2. The position right now simplifies a lot, and this is just after sharp play, we are reaching some equal endgame. This is one of a possible line, and it could just happen in the game. Queen d6 is some inaccuracy, rook c6 of course, and Aronian, Levon Aronian just got the two pieces for the rook, which is of course quite favorable. ba3, and rook f4 is some another mistake from the world chess champion. Queen e7 should be tried here. After knight f3, rook f4, bishop e4, rook d2 f8. This looks like a much better practical chance. White will have constant problems with king, but obviously still his chances are higher. Right now at a rook f4, bishop c4 position is becoming very, very tough for Carlsen. g5, bishop e6, king g7, rook b1. Again, there is some very strong attack against black's king. Rook d4, rook b7, king f6. But here it is the moment in which Levon Aronian just made some big blunder. Bishop b3 is not so obvious looking move, but this was the one which should give an easy win. Let's have a look. Queen c6 is of course some kind of desperation, and such an endgame is of course lost. It doesn't look like a position that can be saved. Three minor pieces will soon dominate the rook, and even the presence of some two additional pawns doesn't change too much. And if king e5, this looks like a good chance, but here queen c3, some perfect geometrical motif, and again, of course, king on e5 looks very, very dangerous, and this gives some perfect chances to white. For instance, rook f8, rook b5, king f6, rook b8. This would be the last chance for black, because if knight e4, this would be the disastrous mistake. King g6, knight d6, and after rook g4, of course, not king h1, because rook f1 would be the mate. So white has to give up the queen in order not to be mated. And after that, of course, position is becoming better for black. So rook b8 is the move which decides the game. Rook b8, and here it is the right moment to just grab the queen. And bishop c2, this is of course complete total end. So queen f3, as I mentioned, is some blunder. King f7, queen f7, king e5. King just took two minor pieces, and it is not that easy to mate it. So rook e7 has to be played, but here it is the right moment to just give up the queen, and we are just reaching an equal endgame. Let's have a look. King f5, queen h7, king f6. Now it's just a draw, but white still push for the win, but there are no bigger chances. Knight e4, king e5. Queen e7, king f5, knight f2. Bishop f4, queen a7, king g6. Queen b6, rook 8 to d6. Queen b1, king g7, queen b7, queen f3, rook f7. Of course, this is a little bit irrelevant because this is completely drawn. Rook g4, and finally both players just agreed to a draw. A sharp game, not without mistakes from both sides, but of course highly interesting. So let's right now move on to the second game. This will be between two same players, but with reversed colors. Some interesting about this game, that this is of course not so often seen when two players rated 2800 are playing against each other, because there's of course rarely seen that even two players have such rating. But this was the situation when both Carlsen and Aronian had 2800. So definitely this was some absolutely top level game, and it was played in Norway in 2014. Let's move on. d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, cd5, ed5, bishop g5, h6, and bishop h4. I forgot to mention, but of course cd5 is some other main move against the Ragozion defense. The follow-up bishop g5 also looks logical. h6, bishop h4, and g5. I mentioned in the introduction to my course that sometimes you have to push the moves h6 and g5, and here it is the situation. For the weakening of the king side, of course, black gets some good control over the e4 square especially, because the knight is already ready to jump on this active square. White also has to lose some time, but obviously there is some big drawback. Pawns cannot go back, and they will be just weak on that spots. Knight e4, and this is the moment in which white can sacrifice the pawn with move knight to d2. In this moment, Aronian decided to take on c3. My opinion is that this is a really risky variation. Black should opt for the move knight g3, where he obtains some fine play. Definitely this dark squared bishop proves to be very, very strong, and it is better to just take it and not to be too greedy to take some pawns. bc3, bishop c3, and rook c1. For the cost of a pawn, of course, black lost some time. He also lost his active knight from e4, so this is something about which white should be happy. Bishop b2 was played by Aronian. To me it looks like that a move like bishop a5 might be better. Still after e3, c6, bishop d3, knight d7, castle, knight f6, knight f3. White definitely has a big compensation, and black will face difficulties. Bishop b2, I think that this is a move which is even worse. But here Magnus Carlsen missed his chance, because here bishop c7 should be played. This is the best move. After queen d7, rook b1. This is the move and the follow-up which should be tried. After queen c7, rook b2, knight c6, e3, bishop f5, h4. Here, damaged pawn structure on king side gives white definitely some upper hand. So rook c7 is some kind of inaccuracy, and right now after knight a6, again the situation is not so bad for black. Rook c2, bishop d4, e3, bishop g7. What is the evaluation of this position? Of course, black took some material because he is a pawn up, but of course that pawns on h6 and g5 look just bad. Also, d5 pawn can become quite an easy target. And on the other hand, white doesn't have any serious weaknesses in his camp, so this is why still I prefer white here. Bishop a6 here was some other try, because in the game it was played something else. Here after ba6, castle, castle, knight f3. White can just play in a normal way, there is no need to rush, because he has definitely much better pawn structure. Black has to play very concretely, not to become worse. Rook c8. This is the best idea here for black. With activity and bishop pair, black should be able to hold an equality. Rook a6, bishop c2, queen d2, bishop e4. Trying maybe at some point just to take on f3 and maybe even to push move d4 after taking on f3. So knight d4, queen d7, queen a5, and here a very precise move, queen to b7. Rook a7, rook a8, rook b7, rook a5. After giving up two weak pawns from the a file, black exchanged queens and has an equal endgame. Of course, right now still it is possible to not lose the pawn with move a3, because after rook a3 there comes bishop d6, hitting two rooks. But still black should be active, is active enough and should be able to hold. Anyway, h4 was tried by Carlsen, which is still a good move. Aronian played the move knight b4. Again, bishop f5 here should be the best move. This is the most accurate. After bishop b5, king f8. Black is not afraid of losing the right to castle. King feels really safe on f8. Rook c1, queen b6. Queen b3, rook d8. Castle, bishop f6. Knight f3. Bishop e4. Even with bad pawn structure, black is doing here fine. And also he has the pawn more. So this is not that bad as it may seem. Alright, knight b4 was tried in the game. Rook c7, just going back with a rook to this quite active place. Castle. Hg5. And of course, black is forced to regain on g5 with a queen, because otherwise if hg5, queen b1, this would be a really disaster for black. Knight on b4 is under attack, and still black has to defend against a mate on h7, so he will just lose some material. So queen g5 is an understandable move. Bishop d6. This looks logical, but in fact white underestimated the unleashed power of black's pieces. Knight f3 should be tried here instead of that dubious move. Queen g6, bishop e2. Queen b6, a3, knight a6. As you can see here also, white's rook is making a lot of moves, but this is just okay for white, he's okay with that. Knight d4. Black's pawn structure is very bad, it looks really ugly, and white still can be happy with his position. With bishop d6 there is a very unexpected chance for black. But with knight c6 Aronian missed his perfect chance of taking over the initiative. The move which should be played was the move queen to d8. Phenomenal idea, and it is still not that clear why it is so dangerous for white. Bishop f8, bishop f8. Rook c1, knight a2. Black can just grab some pawn. Knight b4, rook c1 and a5. Bishop e2, bishop f5. From human point of view, it doesn't look bad at all for white. In fact, I would even prefer here white here at first sight. But a powerful engine, which is of course Stockfish, evaluates it completely different. White doesn't have any attack against exposed black king, and queenside pawns are ready to roll. This is totally not obvious to me. Maybe after having a little bit more deep into this position, I can see something which Stockfish likes a lot about this position from black. And in fact, there is just nothing better than just to believe Stockfish that this position is +2 for black. -2, of course, from normal point of view. This is quite ridiculous for me, and I believe that also for you. but this is just evaluation of this position. So queen d8 was the perfect chance for Aronian. Instead, he went back with a knight to c6. Bishop f8 and king f8. This is again some inaccuracy. Still with bishop f8, queen f3, bishop e6, rook b7, rook c8. All of black's pieces are very active, and still white king is on e1. It didn't castle, so it also helps black to create some counterplay. And this is after queen f4. There is just nothing better for white. Queen f4, ef4, knight a5, rook b1, bishop f5. Black is just okay here. Again, thanks to very big activity of his pieces. King f8 was played because, of course, you don't want to put your bishop from the long diagonal, but bishop on f8 was standing quite well. Queen f3, bishop e6, rook b7. This is not the best moment for being greedy, so this is right now some inaccuracy from Magnus Carlsen. Queen f4, just as in the previous note, is just good. The possible line could be rook b8, queen g5, hg5, knight f3, and d4. Activity, again only chance for black. a4, because pawn on a2 was hanging, d3, fe3. Bishop f6, it doesn't, to be honest, defend the g5 pawn, because thanks to tactics, white can just take it. And rook c6, this is of course the point. After bc6, rook h8, king e7, rook b8, bishop e3, with chances for black to hold this worse endgame. Two bishops are standing quite active, but of course white can play this position for 50 moves, and he can try anything in such endgame. This was of course much better than what happened in the game for white. Rook c8, again the activity is here very important, and with knight e5, black is beginning to make some threats. So queen f4 is logical, takes, but with knight d4, this is right now the moment in which black misplayed something. Knight a5 was the right choice. Of course, again, it looks more logical to play with knight into the center on the active square on d4, but black has to force the play a little bit, and this is why knight a5 was better. Rook a7, rook c1, king e2, knight c4, take, and in this position actually there is just nothing better for both sides than just to repeat the position. And after knight d4, knight b3 was the mistake from white. There was some other good moves, for instance, like king d1, which should secure some perfect winning chances. But with knight b3, now the game inevitably is heading for a draw. Knight b3, a b3, rook c2. Again, as we can see, Aronian perfectly understands that only activity can save him. King d1, rook f2, bishop e2, and grabbing another pawn. Right now there are only two pawns in black's camp, in white's camp, so it is not that hard to defend such position. Rook a7, rook d4, king c1, and rook b4, hitting the b3 pawn. Bishop h5, bishop d4. Of course, still there are some threats connected with a pawn on f7, so black has to play cautious. Rook a4, bishop e3, king b2. And rook b6. Again, pawn on f7 is quite well defended. Bishop e2, bishop d7. Rook a5, bishop e6. Rook h5. King g7. And here Carlsen decided that he doesn't want to continue the fight, and he just decided that this is the right time to simplify the position. Of course, right now this is just a dead draw due to the opposite colored bishops. Let's have a quick look how the game ended. Bishop b4, king c4, bishop e7. Rook d7, king f6. This is quite irrelevant how both players are defending and how they are playing. And this is, of course, right now a total draw. Alright, so again, some very interesting and very complicated play and very complicated game with some missed chances, especially on the 18th move with a brilliant move, a brilliant idea connected with move queen d8. But obviously it is it is really hard to play such positions even when both players are rated 2800. Just to remind you, queen d8 was a fantastic idea, after which the activity should give black perfect winning chances. Alright, so this was the first chapter with some illustrative games. In the next chapters we are going to see some theory, not only of Ragozion, but also from some other line, because this is the full repertoire for black based on the Ragozion defense. Thank you for watching, goodbye.